I was told I was too rough to sit at my son's Christmas table after paying his mortgage for 5 years. When Claire smiled and said, "They need their own space," I smiled back and left. The marble sideboard cost $486 to ship. I know that because I paid the freight bill. I know the company, the weight on the invoice, and the delivery window they gave Evan while I was at my shop keeping an air handler alive 3 days before a heat wave. Claire had sent me the link first. "Dad, this would make the dining room feel finished. What do you think?" By then I understood that "what do you think" was not a question. It was an invoice wearing manners. So I paid it. 5 years later, on Christmas Eve, I set my briefcase on that same sideboard. Leather against marble. Clean sound. Final sound. But I am getting ahead of myself. Claire said it with the soft voice she used when cruelty needed a ribbon. "They need their own space, Walt." She stood near the fireplace in a cream sweater, one hand resting on a chair I had helped pay for. Behind her, the dining room table was set for 12. Linen napkins, crystal glasses, candles and brass holders. A room arranged for people who belonged. Apparently, I did not. I looked past her into the house in Eastover Ridge. The linen curtains had been ordered from Charleston because Claire said the cheaper ones had the wrong weight. The walnut floors had been refinished after Evan called about cash flow. The quartz island glowed under pendant lights. The new HVAC system hummed through the vents because the old unit had died in July, and Claire had said she could not host guests in that kind of air. That kind of air had cost me $13,900. The front steps, roof flashing, and landscaping had all been handled by checks that left my life quietly because first impressions mattered to Claire. All of it had passed through my hands. My bank account, my credit card, my retirement savings, Caroline's life insurance. That last one stayed in my chest longer than the others. Caroline had left that money after 11 months of pain she endured with more grace than most people bring to a good day. I had told myself using it for Evan was honoring her. Helping our son build a home was the cleanest thing grief could still do with money. Now I stood in that home, 1 week before Christmas, being told there was no chair for me. Evan sat on the edge of the sofa with his elbows on his knees, rubbing the back of his neck. He had done that since he was 10. Back then it meant a broken lamp, a bad report card, a lie too small to survive daylight. At 36, it meant the same thing, only now he called avoidance boundaries. "Dad," he said, not looking at me long enough, "please don't make this harder than it has to be." I looked at my son. Then at Claire. Then at the dining room table waiting behind them. I was 68 years old. I had spent 35 years building Brennan Mechanical from a van, a license, and hands that still ached when rain came. I had fixed other people's heat in January and their air in August. I had made payroll sick and paid health insurance for men whose children I watched grow up. Inside my own son's house, I had become too rough for dinner. I picked up my coat. "Tell Richard and Elaine I said Merry Christmas," I said. Then I walked out before either of them could pretend this was kindness. Let me tell you about Caroline first. Because Caroline is the reason I kept saying yes long after a smarter man would have asked for receipts before love. Caroline and Brennan married me in 1984 in a small Methodist church with bad carpet, good music, and a reception in her aunt's backyard under rented white tents. She was 23. I was 24. I had a work van, a contractor's license, and the kind of confidence young men mistake for a business plan. She had less patience for dreams than I did. Not because she lacked faith in me, because she understood that faith still has to be fed, invoiced, taxed, and balanced every month. For the first 6 years of our marriage, Caroline worked nights at a laundromat on Wake Forest Road. She folded strangers' shirts, cleaned lint traps, kept coins stacked in paper sleeves, and came home smelling like detergent and hot metal. She never called it beneath her. Work is work, she used to say. The shame is in pretending you're above it. When Brennan Mechanical started growing, she moved from the laundromat to the folding table in my shop office. At first, she helped with invoices, then payroll, then vendor accounts, then tax files. By the time we had 16 employees, Caroline knew the business better than half the men who wore shirts with my name on them. She ran my books for 24 years. Leonard Price, our accountant, once told me Caroline's records were so clean they made him suspicious on principle. She took that as a compliment, which it was. She caught duplicate charges, late supplier credits, insurance errors, payroll mistakes, and one technician who thought gas receipts were a creative writing exercise. She did it quietly, precisely, without ever needing the room to know how much of the room depended on her. That was Caroline. She died of pancreatic cancer in 2019. 11 months from diagnosis to the end. Long enough for fear to become routine. Not long enough for goodbye to become believable. Evan was 31 when she died. Claire had been in his life for almost 3 years by then. They were not engaged yet, but everyone knew the direction things were headed. Caroline saw it too. 3 months before she passed, when the house was quiet and pain had left her too tired for small talk, she said, "Watch Claire after I'm gone." I asked her what she meant. Caroline looked toward the hallway, then back at me. "She measures people, Walt." I remember that because she did not say it with anger. She said it like she was reading a gauge. Measures them how? What they have, what they can offer, whether they're worth maintaining. She closed her eyes for a moment. You're going to be valuable to her for a while. While you're valuable, you'll be welcome. I told her she was being hard on the girl. Caroline smiled then. Not a happy smile. The old married kind. The kind that says, "I know you heard me, even if you're not ready to know I'm right." "I hope I am," she said. She was not. Evan married Claire 10 months after Caroline's funeral. I remember standing in the back of the church before the ceremony, watching my son adjust his cuff links with shaking hands. He looked happy, nervous, but happy. And after 11 months of hospital rooms, medication schedules, hospice forms, and the quiet brutality of cleaning out Caroline's side of the closet, I wanted happiness anywhere I could find it. So I gave the toast. I had written it 4 times. The first version was too heavy. The second tried too hard not to mention Caroline and somehow made her absence louder. The third sounded like something a man says when he has not slept. The fourth was simple enough to survive the room. I told Evan marriage was not a feeling. It was maintenance. It was showing up before something broke. It was knowing the difference between a repair and a replacement. People laughed at the contractor part. Claire smiled. I wrote them a check for $42,000 as a wedding gift. Not because they asked, because I could, because Caroline would have wanted Evan to begin married life with breathing room, because grief makes money feel like something that needs a moral assignment, and I assigned it to my son. 14 months later, Evan called me. I knew his voice before he reached the ask. They had found a house in Eastover Ridge. 4 bedrooms. Good schools nearby. Mature trees. A renovated kitchen Claire loved. Listed at $426,000. Their income could carry most of it, he said, but the down payment gap was bigger than expected. Closing costs, inspection issues, furniture, moving expenses. All at once. How much? I asked. He exhaled. $58,000. I sat at my kitchen table, across from the chair Caroline no longer used. Then Evan added, too quickly, and maybe help with the mortgage for a while, just until we stabilize. Around $3,100 a month. I should have asked what stabilize meant. I should have asked for an end date. Instead, I looked at Caroline's photograph on the shelf and thought, this is family. All right, I said. The automatic transfer began the 1st of February. It would run for 5 years. The third sign was the kitchen. Claire called it an update, which is one of those words people use when they want to sound like maintenance. The quartz island she loved cost $21,600 after fabrication, delivery, and installation. The old counter was not broken. It held plates. It wiped clean. It had survived the previous family perfectly well. But Claire said the veining in the new stone would bring the room together. Evan called me the next day. "Dad, I know it's a lot," he said, "but she's been working so hard on the house. It would mean something to her." I was sitting in my office at Brennan Mechanical, eating a sandwich over a stack of service reports. "Is it necessary?" I asked. He went quiet. Then he said, "It's important to her." That was not the same answer. I paid it anyway. The fourth sign was the HVAC system. That one was easier to justify. July and Raleigh can make a house feel personal about hurting you, and their old unit failed during the hottest week of the summer. Evan called at 6:40 in the morning, embarrassed and sweating through the phone. "The upstairs is 86 degrees, he said. "Claire's parents are visiting next weekend." I replaced the whole system through one of my supplier contacts. $13,900. Better equipment than I had in my own house. I told myself that was different. Heat and air were not vanity. Comfort mattered. Safety mattered. Still, when I stood in my own hallway that night and heard my old unit rattle like loose change in a coffee can, I thought about Caroline. She would have looked at me over her glasses. Not angry. Just waiting for me to hear myself. The fifth sign was Christmas. Year 3. Evan called in November and used the voice men use when they are delivering someone else's decision. "Dad, this year we're keeping Christmas small," he said. "Claire's parents are coming in, and they wanted it to be just immediate family." Immediate family. I let that sit between us. "I see," I said. "We'll do something for New Year's. Please don't make it weird." I looked at the calendar on my shop wall. The automatic transfer would go out again on December 1st. $3,100. Right on schedule. I said, "All right, son." New Year's dinner was polite. Claire gave me a candle I did not want and thanked me for understanding. I drove home at 9:15, parked in my driveway, and sat there with the engine off. The house behind me was cold around the edges. The house I was paying for was warm. I opened the folder that night. Not because I knew what I was going to do with it. Because I am a man who ran a contracting business for 35 years, and men who survive in that world learn one thing early. Memory is not documentation. The folder had started in year 2. Leonard Price had told me to keep records of every dollar I gave Evan and Claire. Not because he expected trouble, because he had been an accountant long enough to know that family money becomes fog the moment someone benefits from forgetting. So I kept it clear. Bank statements, wire confirmations, credit card receipts, contractor invoices, emails from Claire that ended with question marks but functioned like payment requests, texts from Evan that began with "Dad, I hate to ask." I spread everything across my kitchen table. The same table where Caroline used to drink coffee while balancing payroll before sunrise. Mortgage assistance, $186,000. 60 months at $3,100. Down payment support, $58,000. Kitchen renovation, $21,600. HVAC replacement, $13,900. Roof repair after the spring storm, $9,750. Property taxes during what Evan called a rough quarter, $11,400. Landscaping before Claire's donor dinner, $7,850. Furniture, emergency repairs, moving costs, and the kind of smaller checks people forget because they are too small to feel shame over individually. $12,600. Grand total, $321,100. I wrote the number on a yellow legal pad. Then I underlined it once. Not twice. Twice would have meant anger. Once meant I had seen it. $321,100 of Caroline's life insurance, my retirement savings, and the working life that had bent my hands into tools had gone into a house where I was no longer suitable for Christmas dinner. I sat with that number for a long time. The refrigerator clicked on. The old vent above the stove rattled. Cold air slipped through the kitchen window I had meant to repair for 3 winters. There it was. The truth, reduced to arithmetic. I had not been helping my son build a home. I had been financing my own exclusion and calling it love. Caroline's photograph sat on the shelf by the hall. I looked at it and said, "You tried to warn me." The photograph said nothing. That was the worst part. Caroline had always been quietest when she was right. The call came at 8:47 on a Wednesday night. I know the time because I checked it afterward, the way a man checks the clock after a pipe bursts or a breaker panel catches fire, trying to identify the exact minute before normal ended. Evan had already told me I was not invited to Christmas. Claire's parents were coming. It would be intimate. They needed a quieter table this year. He hoped I understood. I had said I understood because sons are very good at making fathers choose between dignity and peace, and I had spent too many years choosing peace. Then Claire called. Her voice had that light, polished edge people get after a second glass of wine loosens the part of them that usually edits. "Walt," she said, "I don't want there to be any confusion." "All right." My parents are particular people. They're educated. They enjoy a certain level of conversation at dinner. I stood in my kitchen with one hand on the counter. The counter was chipped near the sink. I had been meaning to replace it for 4 years. Claire continued. Current events, books, the arts, travel, not just, she paused softly, like she was trying to be kind and failing on purpose, service work. I said nothing. What exactly would you contribute at that table? She asked. Stories about vents, wiring, ductwork. 35 years of business moved through my mind. Payroll, insurance, tax filings, men who bought houses because my company paid them steady wages, wives who sent Christmas cards because I kept their husbands employed through slow seasons, customers who called me before they called their own relatives when the heat went out. I built a company from nothing, I said. I'm sure that feels impressive in your world, Claire said. My world. There it was. Then she said, but background matters, Walt. Refinement matters. Caroline understood that better than you do. The kitchen went very still. Not quiet. Still. There is a difference. When someone says your dead wife's name in a tone they have not earned, the room does not get louder. It narrows. What did you say? I asked. Claire exhaled. And then she made the mistake she could not come back from. She worked nights folding other people's laundry, Claire said. Her voice did not rise. That made it worse. She was practical, I'll give her that, but she knew what kind of rooms were meant for her. I stood with the phone against my ear and felt something in me go completely quiet. Not calm. Quiet. There are moments when anger is too small for what has happened. It comes later, maybe, or it does not come at all because the insult has landed somewhere deeper than temper can reach. Caroline, who had kept our business alive through the years when one bad month could have ended it. Caroline, who knew every supplier account, every payroll tax deadline, every employee's child's name. Caroline, who had spent her final months making sure I knew where every folder was because even dying, she was trying to leave the living organized. And Claire Whitmore Brennan, standing in a house paid for with that woman's life insurance, had decided to call her lesser. "You should be careful," I said. Claire gave a small laugh. "With what?" "With confusing polish for class." She said nothing. I lowered my voice until it sounded like someone else's. "Caroline had more class standing behind a laundromat counter at midnight than your entire family has ever brought to a dinner table." "Oh, Walt, please." "No," I said. "You've said enough." I looked at the chipped counter, the cold window, the house I had neglected while funding hers. "This conversation is over," I said. "We are done." Then I hung up before she could turn cruelty into explanation. I called Leonard Price at 9:06 the next morning. Leonard had handled my taxes for 33 years and my business books for almost as long. He was the kind of accountant who made silence feel like a ledger being balanced. "Walt," he said, "you sound awake too early. I need a full accounting." There was 1 second of nothing. "Of what?" "Everything I've put into Evan's house since the purchase. Down payment, mortgage transfers, renovations, repairs, taxes, furniture, landscaping. Every transaction. Dates, amounts, source accounts, supporting documents." Leonard did not ask why immediately. That is why I trusted him. "How detailed?" "Courtroom detailed," I said, "even if it never sees a courtroom." Then he understood enough. "You ready to tell me what happened?" I told him. Not all the feelings. Feelings are hard to audit. I gave him facts. The Christmas exclusion. Claire's phone call. Caroline's name in Claire's mouth. The number on my legal pad. $321,100. Leonard listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "I warned you to keep records." "You did." "Did you?" "Yes." "Good," he said. "Then we're not starting from pain. We're starting from paper." That steadied me more than sympathy would have. "Give me 48 hours, Leonard said. "I'll make it clean." After I hung up, I called the bank. Susan Bell had managed my accounts for 11 years. She had a warm voice and the dangerous efficiency of a woman who could find old wire records before you finished explaining why. "I need to cancel an automatic transfer," I said. "Of course. Which one?" $3,100 monthly to the Eastover Ridge mortgage account." A few keys clicked. "Effective date?" I looked around my kitchen. The window frame had frost in the corners. The vent over the stove rattled when the heat came on. The paint above the cabinets had yellowed. I had been living inside postponement while paying for Claire's refinements on schedule. "Effective immediately," I said. Susan paused just long enough to be human. "Done," she said. That was the first clean breath I had taken in days. Then I called Martin Keller. Martin had practiced family and civil law in Raleigh for 29 years. He was not dramatic. Dramatic lawyers make clients feel avenged before anything useful has happened. I told him the whole thing. The money, the exclusion, the call, the insult to Caroline, the possibility that Evan knew more than he admitted and less than he should have. Martin asked 4 questions. Were the payments documented as loans? No. Any written repayment agreement? No. Any ownership interest in the house? No. Did they ever state, in writing, that your help entitled you to anything? I almost laughed. No. They were careful never to say anything that honest. Martin sighed softly. Then legally, Walt, most of this is going to be treated as gifts. Painful gifts. Documented gifts. But gifts. I had expected that. It still landed hard. So there's nothing? I didn't say that, Martin said. You may not have a recovery case, But documentation has value beyond recovery. What kind of value? The kind that corrects a false story before it becomes the accepted one. I sat very still. If they accepted substantial support while excluding you, and if they try to portray you as unstable or unreasonable, a clean record matters. Not just legally, socially, morally. I looked at Caroline's photograph. So I can't make them pay me back. Probably not. But I can make sure people know what they were sitting inside. Martin was quiet for a beat. Yes, he said. That kind of accounting is still available. They retaliated on day 3. I had expected something. A cold voicemail from Evan. A message from Claire dressed up as concern. Maybe a warning that I was damaging the family by refusing to keep paying for the house I was no longer refined enough to enter. I did not expect the Raleigh Ledger. Page 5. Community section. The article was about adult children navigating difficult boundaries with aging parents during the holidays. It used phrases like emotional volatility, complicated grief, and declining judgment. It quoted unnamed family sources describing an older widower who had become controlling after his wife's death. My name was not printed. My face was. A photograph from Evan's firm picnic 2 summers earlier. I remembered the day. I had stood beside my son in a blue shirt Caroline used to like and told one of his co-workers how proud I was of him. Now that photograph was being used to make me look like a problem people had survived. I read the byline twice. Helen Royce. Freelance contributor. Lifestyle. Family features. Local culture. Then I opened LinkedIn. Evan Brennan had a new connection from 4 days earlier. Helen Royce. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time with the article open beside the folder. Then I called Leonard. Walt. I'm going to need 12 copies of everything, I said. Leonard did not ask why. Give me until tomorrow, he said. I made the packets myself. Not because Leonard could not have done it better. Because some work has to pass through your own hands before you can let it leave them. For 2 evenings, I sat at my kitchen table with the printer running beside me and Caroline's photograph on the shelf behind my shoulder. I used 12 black folders. No labels on the outside. Nothing dramatic. Just clean paper, arranged in an order nobody could pretend not to understand. Each packet started with Leonard's 5-year financial summary. Mortgage assistance, down payment, kitchen renovation, HVAC replacement, roof repair, property taxes, landscaping, furniture, emergency transfers. Total, $321,100. Behind that were selected bank statements, with dates and amounts highlighted. Then came Claire's public posts. The Quartz Island captioned, finally making this space feel like us. The donor dinner photos under the new linen curtains. The weekend trip 3 days after Evan had called me about a rough quarter. Then the Raleigh Ledger article. I included Helen Royce's byline, the photograph of me, the language about declining judgment, and the LinkedIn screenshot showing Evan had connected with her 4 days before publication. 12 packets. 1 for each person at Claire's Christmas Eve dinner. I knew the guest count because Evan had mentioned it in October, back when I was still allowed to receive information about their lives as long as I did not expect a chair in it. When I finished, I stacked the folders inside my briefcase. The latch clicked shut. It sounded like a decision. I wore Caroline's funeral suit. Navy wool, plain cut, no shine. She had picked it herself 8 years earlier when one of my technicians died, and I needed something that did not look like it came from the back of a work truck. We stood in a department store under fluorescent lights while she studied me with the seriousness she brought to invoices and paint colors. That one, she said. It fits like you mean it. I had not worn it since her service. On Christmas Eve, I took it from the closet, brushed the shoulders, and tied the dark gray tie she always said made me look less tired than I was. Then I put the 12 packets into my briefcase and drove to Eastover Ridge. I arrived at 7:15. The house glowed from the inside. Warm windows, soft curtains, candlelight moving behind glass. The kind of house people slow down to admire because it tells a clean story from the street. I parked behind a silver SUV I recognized as Richard Whitmore's. Through the front window, I could see the dining room. The linen curtains Claire had needed. The walnut floors. The marble sideboard. The edge of the quartz island shining through the kitchen doorway. Every surface looked refined. Every surface had a receipt. I sat in the truck for 10 seconds with my hands on the wheel. Then I picked up my briefcase and walked to the door. The front door was unlocked. Claire liked saying locked doors made a neighborhood feel afraid, which was easy to say when you lived in a house someone else had helped secure. I stepped inside. The sound from the dining room stopped before I reached it. 12 faces turned toward me. Claire froze with her wine glass halfway to her mouth. Evan went pale in the way a son goes pale when he knows exactly why his father has arrived and still hopes to be wrong. Richard Whitmore sat at the far end of the table, Elaine beside him, two of Evan's colleagues, a neighbor couple, Claire's sister Maggie, people arranged around candles, plates, crystal, and a dinner I had finally been judged too rough to attend. "Good evening," I said. My voice was even because I had spent 10 days making sure it would be. I crossed to the marble sideboard and set my briefcase down. Leather on marble. Clean. Final. Then I opened it. I took out the first black folder and placed it beside Elaine's plate. Then Richard's. Then Maggie's. One by one, I moved around the table and gave every guest a packet. No hurry. No speech. Just paper. People opened the packets carefully at first. Then faster. Paper has a way of changing posture in a room. Shoulders lower. Smiles disappear. People stop performing dinner and start reading evidence. I stood beside the marble sideboard. "The first page is a 5-year financial summary," I said. "Every mortgage payment I made, every repair, every renovation, every transfer into this house." No one interrupted. "That total is $321,100. Claire made a small sound. I looked at her, but did not stop. "The Raleigh Ledger article in your packets was published 3 days after I canceled the monthly mortgage transfer and after I was told I was not welcome at this dinner." Richard turned a page. Elaine was already reading the highlighted bank statements. "The article suggests I am an unstable widower whose family had no choice but to set boundaries. What it does not mention is that those boundaries started when I stopped paying for the house." Evan looked down at the table. Not at me. Not at the guests. At the polished wood between his hands, as if he might find a version of himself there he could still defend. I tapped the last page. The final screenshot shows Evan connected with the writer 4 days before that article appeared. Elaine set the summary down slowly. Her face had lost all dinner party softness. She looked at Claire, then at Evan. "This is obscene," she said. Claire stood so quickly her chair scraped against the walnut floor. "This is a private family matter," she said. Her voice had lost the softness. There was no ribbon around it now, just the blade underneath. I closed my briefcase. "It stopped being private," I said, "when you put my face in the newspaper." No one moved. I looked at Evan. My son sat at the head of a table I had helped fund, in a house I had helped carry, surrounded by people who were now reading the part of the story he had allowed to stay hidden. I thought about his wedding toast. I thought about Caroline's empty chair. I thought about 35 years of crawl spaces, service calls, payroll, invoices, and saying yes because fathers confuse sacrifice with proof. Then I said the only sentence I had come there to say. I hope you enjoy the rest of your dinner. It's the last one I'll ever help pay for. I walked toward the door. For half a second, nothing happened behind me. That half second mattered. It was the silence after a breaker trips, before everyone realizes which rooms have gone dark. The packets were open. The numbers were visible. The story Claire and Evan had served with dinner had been interrupted by receipts. Then the room started to move. Elaine spoke first. Not loudly, but sharply enough that every word carried. Claire, what is this? Richard said something under his breath. One of Evan's colleagues closed his folder and leaned back from the table as if financial truth had physical heat. The neighbor woman whispered, 321,000, like the number itself had offended her. Claire's voice rose. You're seeing selected information. There is context. I almost stopped at that. Context. The word people reach for when the facts are already bad. Evan said, Dad, wait. I kept walking. Not because I did not hear him. Because I did. Maggie, Claire's sister, spoke next. I had only met her twice, quiet woman, observant eyes. I've been sitting here for 20 minutes wondering whether I was going to say anything, she said. I think I am. Claire snapped, Maggie, don't. That was the last thing I heard clearly. I stepped out through the unlocked front door into the cold Christmas Eve air. The neighborhood was quiet. White lights on rooflines. A dusting of frost on lawns trimmed by people who paid other people to keep winter looking elegant. I got into my truck and sat with the engine off. My breath fogged the windshield. For the first time in 5 years, nothing was leaving my account on the 1st of next month. I started the engine and drove home. Leonard called me on December 27th. I was in the kitchen, measuring the window frame with a tape measure I had owned longer than Evan had been alive. The paperwork is clean, Leonard said. Payment termination, transfer history, everything organized. Good. And Martin reviewed the article. I set the tape measure on the counter. There may be a civil path, Leonard said. Defamation is difficult, but not imaginary. The article, the photo, the timing, Evan's LinkedIn connection to Helen Royce. It creates a pattern. I looked at the window. Cold air slipped through the frame in a thin line. For years I had told myself I would fix it after the next thing was paid. There had always been a next thing. Evan's tax bill, Claire's landscaping, the roof, the island, the mortgage. What do you want, Walt? Leonard asked. That was why he was good at his job. Not because he knew numbers. Because he knew when the number was no longer the question. I stood there in the kitchen Caroline and I had bought together, in the house I had neglected while funding a better-looking one across town. I don't want revenge, I said. Leonard stayed quiet. I don't even want the money back. Not really. What do you want? I looked at the window again. I want to be done. I had the kitchen window repaired in January. 3 hours. $280. A small job, almost embarrassing in its simplicity after 5 years of moving thousands of dollars across town, like my own house, could wait forever. The contractor replaced the frame seal, adjusted the sash, and asked if I wanted the old vent above the stove looked at too. I said yes. When he left, the kitchen was quiet in a way I had forgotten a room could be quiet. No rattle. No draft. Just still air. I stood there for a while with my hand on the counter. Small things matter when they are finally yours again. Martin Keller and I met in February. I had decided not to sue. The defamation path existed, but it would cost time, money, and attention I no longer wanted to spend chasing people who had already shown me what they were willing to do with a story. Martin understood. Instead, he prepared a formal record. Not a lawsuit. A document. Financial history. 5 years of transfers. The payment termination. The pattern of exclusion. The Raleigh Ledger article. The photograph. Evan's connection to Helen Royce before publication. Leonard's accounting attached as an exhibit. Everything organized cleanly enough that if anyone ever asked what happened, I would not have to explain it from memory. Martin slid the folder across his desk. Sometimes, he said, the value is that the truth exists somewhere official. I took it home. I put Martin's formal record in the filing cabinet beside the folder. The one I had started in year 2, before I knew I was building anything except clarity. Caroline had told me to watch Claire carefully. I had not watched carefully enough, not soon enough. But I had kept records. Bank statements do not flatter. Receipts do not soften. Dates do not choose sides. They stay. And when I needed them, they did what records are supposed to do. They told the truth. Evan called me in March. I let it go to voicemail. Not because I wanted him to suffer, because some voices still have keys to rooms inside you, and I needed to decide whether I was ready to open that door. The message was 6 minutes long. He said he was sorry. He said he had not understood the full financial picture, which I believed in the way you believe half a weather report. Evan knew what the mortgage cost. He knew when the transfer arrived. A man can fail to add the numbers, but he does not fail to notice who keeps the lights on. He said he and Claire were working through things. He said he missed me. Then, near the end, his voice changed. Dad, I know I don't have the right to ask anything from you. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry. I listened twice. Then I waited a week. When I called back, he answered on the first ring. I heard your message, I said. He was quiet. I'm not ready for more than that yet. I understand, he said. For once, I believed him. I do not know what happens next with Evan. That is the honest answer, and I am finished giving dishonest ones because they are easier to hear. What I know is smaller. The kitchen window closes properly now. The vent above the stove no longer rattles when the heat comes on. I painted the walls in February, a warm off-white Caroline would have chosen after pretending to consider 6 other colors first. My retirement savings will recover slowly, if I give them enough years and stop confusing love with automatic withdrawals. Brennan Mechanical is still running. Younger men do more of the climbing now. I still check invoices, still know which suppliers round up when they think nobody is looking, still get to the shop before sunrise, because some habits are not habits. They are architecture. One night, after the paint dried, I stood in the kitchen with Caroline's photograph on the counter. I told her about the dinner. The briefcase on the marble sideboard. The 12 packets. Elaine sang obscene in a voice that sounded like a door opening. I told her I walked out before the room finished breaking because I had not gone there to watch damage. I had gone there to leave the truth. I handled it, I said. The photograph said nothing. Which, after 35 years of marriage, felt like agreement. They said I was not refined enough to sit at the table. But I had paid for the floor beneath it. I had helped buy the chairs around it, the roof over it, the counters beside it, the curtains behind it, and the warm air moving through the vents while people discussed my absence like manners made theft more elegant. For 5 years, I mistook being needed for being loved. That was my mistake. Caroline knew which spaces were meant for her because she carried dignity into every room herself. It took me longer. But I know now. A table you have to buy your way into was never a family table at all.